We are ready once again to start Let's Talk Comics. A.E. Costello is joining us. That makes me happy. I was talking to A.E. Just earlier this week about this feeling that you look at your stuff and you just go, ick, right? And the crazy thing about imposter syndrome is that the only people you worry about are the people who look at their work and they don't see anything wrong. They're just happy as pie. And it's okay to be happy about your work, but most of us see a few flaws. And the fact that you see those flaws means that you're growing, you're getting better as an artist. The people that don't tend to fall into the Dunning-Kruger category, which is you literally don't know enough about the thing you're doing to know what you don't know. In other words, if I started dancing, if I started ballet tomorrow and just went out and started ballet dancing, you can bet that I would probably think that I was doing very, very good because I don't know enough about ballet to know what I don't know. And then the more that I learn about ballet, the more I start to experience that and grow my skills, then I can look at my performance and say, ooh, boy, that was rough. You need to, learn to stand on your toes more or whatever you do in ballet. Uh, as you learn more about your craft, you start to see those flaws. They jump out at you. It's a sign of growth. It's a good thing. It's people file it away under imposter syndrome, and it's really growth. JC says in serious, because I'm not an artist, it brings me great joy when I get a page back from an artist I commissioned and watch all the details they added that weren't there in the script. Boy, I'll tell you, I can co-sign that 110%. In fact, I've got really weird attitudes about that, JC. I don't know whether you and I have ever talked about this. Travis, C. Clyde, Tyler, Blake, and Stan are joining us. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Uh, JC, when it comes to collaboration, I really feel strongly about giving enough information, certainly giving information that's useful. But the way I work with my colorist, Alex Heberling, is I try to give her as little of my information as possible. And part of that is because I want to give my collaborator, in this case, my colorist, I want to give my partner ownership over the part that they're doing. I want them to feel complete ownership. I don't want them to feel like they're filling out a form or a requisition when they're working in collaboration with me. I want them to own that. And by owning it, I think my own personal experience has been that they go great guns. And so Alex knows she's got 100% latitude to add things to the background, to do anything she thinks that page needs to take it to the next level, and often does, That does not work 100% across the board for everybody, as you already probably know, JC. As some people that you collaborate with, they've been burned so many times by working in a collaboration that they do exactly what is laid out on that page because they've been burned by doing the reverse. you know, and so they do just what is listed right out because they've been in bad collaborations. And of course, in certain cases like JC, I'm sure you've got a very clear vision for where this thing is going, and you have certain things that you really want to show up in those panels, and that's important for you to express that, or else you're going to be disappointed, right? But I do really believe in giving people as much latitude as possible. It gives it like an ownership that they take, and I find that kind of exciting. Jerry says every artist is different. Some want more instruction. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jerry. Like I said, and when I talk to those people, the reason because they got burnt. Right. And then they've got to go back and redo something because they didn't do it according to what was laid out. Uh, there's no one size fits all. A.E. Costello writes, What do you think about trying to draw a four-panel daily comic or a four-panel comic daily in order to get better quickly? Well, I've got a lot of thoughts on that. As you might imagine, that's what I did. And I got to put an asterisk in there because that's what I did in 2000 when I started, which was pre-social media. And that's something that I think is important. Okay. Because this is going to wrap into a whole lot of opinions that I've got. But the long and short of it is, I think it's a very good idea, and that's what it took for me. And it took me. And by the way, quickly is doing heavy lifting in there, because I did a daily comic strip that went Monday through Saturday with no breaks at all for 10 years. Okay. And this was pre social media. It was website first. It was a very different landscape than the one that we've got today. I will absolutely say that it took me a good 10 years to get to a point where my humor writing was hitting reliably. It took me 10 years to really learn my craft. And I've got the archive to prove it. There were flashes of what I think are brilliance. There were moments where I just look at that strip and I go, "What were you thinking?" Uh, in an effort to try to get better, quote unquote, quickly, especially since four-panel comics tend to be humor, and humor tends to be the most difficult thing in the world to write, bar none. There's nothing harder than humor to write. Uh, it quickly is not going to be quick. And I would encourage you. I think Substack might be the perfect place to do that. And what I would want you to do is to post like do a week's worth and then post like the entire week in a newsletter or something along those lines. Because what I would be a little bit concerned about you doing, is, especially in the very, very beginning, is you're putting out things that are not going to hit well. They just won't until you do a whole lot more learning about your craft. Unless you're magic, unless you're just one of these breakout successes that just is naturally funny, and I mean funny in writing, because some of the funniest people I've ever met who were funny in real life were not funny in writing. Being funny in writing is a different thing altogether. And of course, I've known a few people who were both. For you to be a breakout success in written comedy is probably going to take you a little bit of time. So I would be a little bit worried about you starting out like on social media, like Blue Sky or one of the other social platforms, because I would see you probably getting very frustrated very quickly, and that would have kind of a negative impact on on your experience. So I would almost encourage you to do this as a I'm learning this new thing. Here's 1 week worth of learning. Here's 1 week worth of attempts, right? And kind of keep it to that until you get your sea legs, and then experiment with going out onto social media. Once you see some positive reaction to that. But again, I'm telling you, quickly is going to be not as quick as you think it is in most cases, unless you're just amazingly talented in this format. And again, you could be a good humor writer, but then writing humor in four panels is really, really difficult. And then, of course, if you're talking about four panels, if you're talking about a humor comic with an ongoing storyline, I want you to look up one of my earlier live streams where I talked about breaking out of that four panel format for a story driven comic. And the importance of that. I think four panels are really good for standalone moments and very good for short form humor. If once you introduce an ongoing storyline, I think the four panel format not only hurts you, but with web publishing, you are not locked into those four panels. And so, if you had any kind of storyline involved in there, I would encourage you to go to that previous live stream where I spent a lot of time talking about breaking out of the 4 panel process. Swinton says, can you put friends and family personalities in your strip without getting sued? I know you can't draw their likenesses. Yeah, well, we spend a lot of time wrestling with drawing likenesses on the Wrong Way show that's over there on YouTube as well. Can you without getting sued? There's two answers to that question. Number one, in the year of our Lord 2025 in the United States of America, you can't do anything without the potential of getting sued. So I would be really dumb if I were to tell you that you could do something without getting sued, because anybody can sue anybody at the drop of a hat. And sometimes for very meaningful reasons and sometimes for silly reasons. So I'm not going to touch the sued part because that's a meaningless statement. Now, let's talk about, can you? Yes, you can. Of course you can. Yeah, you can put your friends and family's personalities into your strip. Yes, you can. Bigger question, should you? And this is a question that has come up on Comic Lab time and time again. And this is one of those Niagara Falls moments. And if you don't know what I mean by that, do a YouTube search for Three Stooges Niagara Falls, and you'll see what I'm talking about. It's something that brings me a repeated aggravation, because people have this very question where they say, "Can I put my friends and family in the strip, or even their personalities, without problems?" And we say on the Comic Lab podcast all the time, "Don't do that. Don't put your family and friends in your comic. Don't draw them into your comic." And I would even caution you against putting their personalities into the comic. It's a bad idea, Swinton. Okay, it's a terrible idea, and you're not going to listen to me if if you're anything like the people that listen to our podcast. You're going to say, yeah, you make good points, Brad, but I'm going to do my own way. And then they write us back a few months later and they say, I'm in a real pickle now because this problem has popped up and that problem has popped up. All problems that we talked about on the show. Here's the thing. Number one, you definitely don't want to put anything recognizable into the comic, right? You don't want to draw a character that looks like that person. You don't want them to be able to recognize themselves. Certainly don't give them the same names. And whatever you do, don't tell them that it's based on them, because then we were just talking about ownership earlier in the live stream. And giving people ownership. And once they feel they have ownership, they really get creative. Well, guess what happens when you take ownership of someone's personality and put it into your comic? They're going to want to have a say in how that character behaves. And that will not mean good story choices, because these people, by and large, A, they're not writers and artists, and B, they don't care about the story so much as they care about not being judged in your freaking comic. Okay. So this is a bad idea, Swinton. I can't encourage you strongly enough to turn the other direction. Now, can you can you take some inspiration from the people around you? Of course, that's what we all do. But to base those characters on the people around you, I think is really dangerous. And if you do it, by all means, don't tell them about it, right? And also give yourself the freedom to uh, to be inspired by, but not controlled by those people that you're drawing inspiration from, right? If you've got somebody that you think is a great sarcastic personality, fantastic, but you don't have to be locked into every aspect of their personality or everything they say. Allow yourself to be inspired by, not guided by, I think is the perfect balance there. But whatever you do, don't tell them that you're basing that comic on them. That's a bad deal. I've seen that go south 100 times. Travis says, flirt with your reference, don't marry your reference. That's a fantastic way to put it, Travis. I am going to steal that. That's exactly right. Flirt. Don't get involved. Don't put a ring on on that reference. Flirt with it. That's a great way to put it. And so Marguerite comes in, makes a great point. Not using real characters for your comics, that ship has sailed for my autobiographical comic. If you're doing autobio, obviously now we're talking about a horse of a different color. Yeah, you're people and there's a whole lot of pitfalls to avoid there as well. Nick Wright says better to mix two or more real people together. Nick, you got it exactly right. If you're going to base a character on somebody, otherwise, are they really your character? Does this character belong to the person you base them on? 100%, 100%, right, Nick. That's a perfect way to sum that up. If you are interested in a comics consultation, I have a 30-minute and a 60-minute version. 30 minutes, we just jump on Zoom and talk for half an hour. No prep, no nothing. You have questions. I'm sure I have thoughts about them. The 60-minute one, I will go through and look at the areas that you'd like to talk about, whether it's your social media, Kickstarter pre-flight, Patreon outreach, etc. And and I will come in with a complete document, and we'll go through over the course of an hour and talk about these issues, and I'll give you some thoughts on where I think you can improve or things like that. Can you do a consultation of any kind of comic or just humor? No, Tyler, I can talk about just about any kind of comic. I've done I the things that you're familiar with are probably my humor comics, but I've also done journalism comics. I've written in a lot of different genres. I taught for years at the University of the Arts before it unfortunately went toes up. I taught a storytelling class and a story analysis class for many years at University of the Arts here in Philadelphia. So I'm pretty confident in my ability to talk about any kind of writing. A random question for everyone. Would you ever get a tattoo as a tribute to your own comic? I'd love to see the answers to that one. I say no, other than the only thing I would be tempted to at this point would be like an Evil Inc. logo, since that hasn't changed in so long. But I don't, number one, the pain. I don't want to sit there and get poked with a needle. And number two, if you look at my art when I started back in 2000, and you look at it today, it's night and day different. I really have changed over the course of 25 years, and I expect to keep changing a little bit. And so putting something permanent based on my art onto my body, I know how I look. I know how I feel when I look at the cover for Evil Inc. Annual Report #1. Uh, I shudder a little bit. And I wouldn't, I'd hate to, but in 2000, I would have been very tempted to get a tattoo, right? And so I don't know that I'd want anything. I don't want anything permanent. And Damien's right. Nobody wants to see my tramp stamp. Scott says, don't make me look at my own art on my skin every day. Yeah. DK Art says no. As soon as I designed it, I would have felt I could have done better. Yeah, I agree. Kevin Colson's joining us. Hey, Kevin, how you doing? Marguerite says, I have tattoos, but not of my comics. I did at one time consider Ignatz Mouse and Crazy Cat on my ankles. Is Substack a good platform for launching a comic? That's a great question. Launching. I don't know that I would launch on Substack. I mean, I would use Substack as part of my outreach, but if I were launching right now, I'd have three main parts. That would be my website, Blue Sky, and Substack. Substack is not going to hurt, and Substack has been very, very reactive. It's had a lot of engagement for me. So in fact, like of the two Substacks I've got really good growth, and even a lot of people subscribing to Evil Inc., even though there's no dedicated content there, there's no exclusive content there. They're just kind of happy to kind of throw in tip jar style, which really surprised me. That's something I've never experienced before. But so I would say yes, but I would make it part of a bigger outreach. right? I wouldn't just limit it to Substack. I'd have my own website, and with 100%, I'd have Blue Sky into that mix too. Blue Sky also generating excellent engagement right now. How do you go about comic strip paneling? When and why? Man, Kendall, I'm not sure I completely understand that question. Either that, or you might be getting paralysis from analysis. I work in Clip Studio, and I'll divide a rectangle into four equal parts with a gutter in between each one of them, and I got my panels. Although that sounds like such a dumb answer, I think you might have been asking something differently. So feel free to rephrase that. But other than the fact that you do need gutters, that's the spaces in between panels. Beginning cartoonists don't think they need them, and it always ends up with huge compositional errors. Take the time, put gutters, little white spaces between your panels. Trust me on that one. Aside from that, don't overthink it. Don't think that they necessarily have to be the same width all the time. Other than planning it so that you can post them easily on social media, like into a square or into a 9:16 aspect ratio. That's those are kind of more important concepts to take into mind than anything else. But just paneling, just four squares, four rectangles. Don't overthink it. There's because the questions are only going to get harder from here on in. But again, I think you're asking something else. So feel free to rephrase that in case I'm being the dummy. Okay. How often do people come to you saying they follow old advice that you gave that you don't stand by anymore? Man, that's a good question. It doesn't happen too often, if I'm being honest. It doesn't happen super often. Every now and again, it comes up, and we have to have a bigger conversation about how the world changes. And things that I was very, very strong on. Like right now, if you went back uh, if you go, I guarantee you in my book, there's a lot of advice on Twitter. I would not advise anyone to be on Twitter right now. In fact, when I was waiting for this live stream to start, I opened up Twitter for the first time in probably 3 months, and immediately was like, oh, I don't miss this a bit. And I have a Twitter account for a web ring that I'm involved in that I kind of do admin work for. So I do have that open in a tab, but just so I can go up and, retweet things. But a lot of the advice that I gave in that book about Twitter, about Facebook, even about Instagram, uh, the world has changed. But thank goodness, I think most people understand that. I don't get too many people who are angry at me that they took advice that I gave in like 2005 and it didn't work out for them. Doesn't happen. Thank goodness it doesn't happen as often as I would fear. But every now and again, it does come up, and we've got to have a bigger conversation. Anytime that anything like that does come up, it's kind of an opportunity for a bigger conversation, a bigger breakthrough, where you can talk to somebody and kind of help them to see some of these things that are, floating out there that they may have missed. And also, it's a good opportunity for me to hear feedback on stuff like that and say, okay, next time I talk about this, I got to be a little bit more careful. It's never something that you want to hear. All I want to hear is how great I am. Right? That's all I want. Probably like you. I think that was an Oscar Wilde quote. I can take any criticism at all as long as it comes disguised as unfettered praise. I am 100% with Oscar on that one. But every now and again it happens, and you gotta take that opportunity to kind of gut check yourself and say, yeah, maybe I boofed that one, right? Egypt says, if you were just starting out, what's the first skill you'd master or devote time to? I love this question because it ain't art. It ain't. In fact, in an upcoming episode of the Comic Lab podcast, somebody asks us, because they've asked us before, is it worth it to get an art major and stuff to be a cartoonist? And I always say art is third on the list of what I would study or what I would suggest somebody study if they wanted to be a comic artist today. It's third on the list of three. Okay. Uh, and in an upcoming episode of Comic Lab, I actually sat down and figured out what classes I would have in a 4-year degree, all 40 classes. If Villanova or Temple or Drexel ever came to me and said, Brad, we've seen your videos. We want to keep you off the pole. We just want you to do a comics related bachelor's degree. And how would you build it? And I actually went and I built it. We're going to be talking about it in an upcoming episode of Comic Lab. And I'm going to put the full 4-year degree, class by class, fall semester, spring semester, fall semester, spring semester. Uh, I'm going to have it in the notes because I went down the rabbit hole on this thing and had too much fun. If I were guiding somebody who wanted to be a comic artist, I would want them to have the basics of sequential art as far as that goes, and the basics of drawing, and I would want a couple of years of intense study of lettering and word balloons because they're called. They're not gonna read your comic if they can't read your comic, and people don't understand how important just the dumb things like making the lettering big enough so I can read it on my small screen phone. They don't give that any thought. Uh, Using upper and lower case lettering is fine. I'm here for it. But if you're going to use upper and lower case, you got to make them even bigger so they're still readable, especially on small screens, because you've got a lot more smaller areas for those letter shapes and those characters to fill in. So there's that. And then just putting word balloons so that they read in the right order. Just understanding, drilling it in that we read from left to right, top to bottom. So things that many of you are going to bristle at, for example, uh, that first word balloon in every panel, unless somebody's holding a gun to your head, should be in the upper left-hand corner every time. There's some special circumstances that doesn't happen. I get that. And maybe it's not a complete gun they're holding to your head. But for people starting out, until you really have a much better grasp on composition, I would be forcing you to put it in the upper left-hand corner every time. Uh, and by the way, you can tell how passionate I am about lettering because I almost forgot what the point of this conversation was. What would I want them to study? I would want them to study a lot of writing, especially if they were going into humor. Humor's the hardest thing to write. I said it 45 minutes ago, and I'll say it again. The hardest thing to write. And if you can write humor, you can write anything because it's like learning Latin. You unlock all the romance languages. It's kind of the same thing, because humor is all about mastering communication of complex ideas very quickly, and it's about tension and release, building tension and release it. Well, if you can do that, you can write sci-fi, you can write romance, you can write drama. If you can really master, I told my storytelling students every semester, you want to learn how to tell a story, learn how to tell a joke. That's the basics. And then every time, just let me, I got to tell you about this. Every time they'd say, "Oh, Mr. Geiger, tell us a joke." And I'd tell them a joke and die. It would just sit there right in the class without fail. Part of that, in my own defense, part of that is because I'm in a classroom. There's this whole bunch of dirty jokes that I can't tell. But, uh, It was terrible. And some of my favorite jokes that they're also kind of dry, and these 20 somethings just sat there and stared at me. It was so humiliating. So I never took that hook. I never took that bait again. But I would, and maybe that means I've got some learning to do. I don't know, but I would want a lot of writing, And I would want somebody who's going into independent comics today. And by the way, that means everybody. There's really no other kind at this point. I would want them to have a really firm basis in running a business and the things that go along with that. Right, the nuts and bolts of running a small business, the basics of freelancing, paying your taxes, also things like social media marketing. I would want them to have pre-press experience, so they're ready to go on that. Those are the kind of things I would bolster that person's education with. The art, I would have obviously it would be part of a three-legged table that their education would stand up on. But the art is something that is very, very subjective. It's all very personal. And it's something that you're going to, once you kind of get a start and learn the basics, like I was saying at the very beginning, once you start to learn what you don't know and those flaws start to pick up and jump out at you, then you're on a journey. And the more you progress, the more you start to see more and more, and you're on a path then. At that point, more art classes aren't necessarily going to help you so much as getting a little, little refresher on some new techniques and stuff like that. Getting a little gut check on whether your compositions are really working out that well. That's all well and good, but the art thing is so subjective and so personal that once I'd get the basics into you, then I'd let you go on your journey. The writing is very similar, but I would want it's the reason I lean so strongly on writing is because comics is such a visual medium. Almost everybody, like 80% of people that come into comics, come to it because they're an artist first, right? They love the art aspect of comics and they completely discount writing. And you can see that happen. Uh, I always I always say this, and part of the reason probably they never asked me to come and talk at SCAD. You can always tell an art school comic because they're beautifully drawn and unreadable. Nothing happening on that page, nothing at all, but gorgeous, right? And that tends to be almost every art school comic that I've ever read, right? So I see that happening out in the world, and so I push back on it a lot, and that's why I think writing is so much more important because I know 80% of the people I'm talking to are artists, and they don't have any appreciation. Again, it goes back to Dunning Kruger. They don't know enough to know what they don't know. Right. And by the way, every time I do my Dunning Kruger talk, a very well thought out, helpful person points out that a lot of the original Dunning Kruger science has kind of been picked apart a little bit. I get that. I get that. The problem is it still describes a very real thing that we all see happening in the world, right? Somebody who comes into something not knowing anything about it. You probably worked for a few of these people and then assumes they know everything and they don't know what they don't know, you know? So it all works together, but I would want that young person that wanted to be a comic artist. I would want them to have a business minor, the equivalent of a business minor, because you're going to be running your own business. I did a comics expo out at a Philadelphia art school. I sat out there for the afternoon Saturday, and oh, I destroyed so many dreams. All of these very nice young people coming up to me, often with their parents, and talking about how this was the typical experience. They'd come up, we'd talk for a little bit. Usually dad would say, "Yeah, well, my daughter it wants to be a comic artist, and I just want to know that the education she's getting here is going to prepare her for working at Marvel." Or maybe they'd say Disney, or maybe they'd say DC. You get the picture. And I'd say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, why do you want that?" And they go, "Well, I want her to have a job. I want her to have a career that she can retire from. And then that's where I've got to take my pin out and just pop their balloon and say they're not hired. They're freelancers. They're contract employees. They work from issue to issue, and the whole landscape is littered with people who were great for a few years, and then the editor changed, and the new editor doesn't like them anymore, or maybe they're just getting too expensive, and now they're shuffled out. And the new young people with stars in their eyes are shuffled in. They feed them a whole lot of BS. They give them a whole lot of stardust to snack on, not a whole lot of dollars and cents. And the cycle starts anew. And that's why I want you to have a business background, because you're going to be a business person. You're going to need to know, A, what to look for in a contract, and B, you're going to need to know that, again, you don't know what you don't know. Before you sign anything, you better have an actual lawyer look at it and explain it to you and discuss it. That's why I think it's a three-legged stool, if I was directing that. And I think it turned out, you'll find out how bad I am at percentages. I think it was 40% business, 40% writing, 20% art, and 10% general education. Does that add up to 100%? 40 and 40 is 80. Okay, so maybe a little bit less than, anyhow, you get, I think I came up to 110%. You get the picture. That's the way it was. Maybe it was 35, 35. You understand. Don't make me do math. Don't make me do math on a Friday. I would really want that to be the breakdown. I had this one dad literally like holding his face. He was despondent because he really thought Marvel Comics or Disney was going to be like a full-time job. And I'm like, I, I, I do a whole talk. As a matter of fact, I did this talk at Villanova University, where the next pope came from. And the two were not related at all. But I did an evening where I talked about this very thing. And I said to the very nice students there, we've had over 100 years of comics history. And this has never changed. The people that sign the contracts do not get taken care of. It's almost always a mistake to sign the contract. Okay. We've had a couple of notable exceptions. Bob Kane was a notable exception. As the way I read the story, his parents were lawyers and got him a special contract, which is why every Batman property you ever see out there has the words Batman created by Bob Kane. The real creator of Bob Kane, the creator of Bob Kane and the creator of Batman and most of the things you love about Batman was a gentleman by the name of Bill Finger, who you've probably, well, maybe you guys are a bunch of cartoonists. You probably heard the Bill Finger story, but the rest of you who aren't, never heard of Bill Finger. And I went and I showed them the Bill Finger story. I showed them how the guys that created Superman were living in poverty until the 1977 Superman, the first Christopher Reeves Superman movie came out, and they were shamed by DC fans into giving them a little stipend that brought them up out of poverty. Stan Lee did well, but his mother was Martin Goodman's sister. I think I got that right. Anyway, it was nepotism. He did well, but the guy that really created Marvel Comics did not do well. Now, Jack Kirby, the guy that created most of what you know as Marvel Comics, also said the other part of this whole thing. And he said in an interview, I knew what I was signing. I knew it was work for hire. I knew, but that's how we were putting food on the table, and nobody ever knew it was going to get this far. The problem is, and by the way, other than a little bright shining time in newspaper syndication, where if you were the right type of cartoonist, and if all you got to do is look at pictures of the NCS back in the day and know that meant basically a whole bunch of people that looked a lot like me. If you were the right type of cartoonist, you could do really well and build wealth as a newspaper cartoonist. That had a beginning and it had an end, and it's long gone. We are not coming back to that ever again. Other than that, and a couple of bright little sparkling points that are not replicatable. Uh, Signing the contract is almost always a mistake. Now, always a mistake? No. There's still sometimes that I'm like 100% in favor of signing the contract. You're doing kids lit, if you're doing graphic novels for younger readers, that is an area that it behooves you to work with a publisher. It behooves you to work with a contract because we can't, an independent cartoonist has a much more difficult time getting to that reader because the reader of the comic is once removed from the buying decision, right? In other words, the parents are the ones buying that comic. And we know we've seen time and time again people doing really good work trying to do it independently end up being like, this is a lot harder nut to crack than I gave it credit for. And these are people that I say you have to. Like I was telling Lindsay, that Lindsay is exactly. I was working with Lindsay on a consultation, and we had this conversation because that's where Lindsay wants to go. And I'm like, this is a case where I absolutely want you to work with a publisher. I'm a big believer in that. Make sure you have, again, it comes down to making sure you have a lawyer to read that through so you understand it. But yeah, other than that, we have 100 years of comics history that really points. Listen, you don't believe your old Uncle Brad? Yeah, that is kind of creepy. You don't believe me? Just go fund me. Go to Fund Me and see how many familiar names from comics history are out there looking for help in their old age because they don't have a pension. They don't have money put away. None of us do at this point. Uh, and they're looking for help from everything from a liver transplant to a teeth cleaning, you know? Prove it to yourself. 100+ years of comics history have not worked out very well for those people who did not understand the business side. Why do kids still want to work at the big two? Because of that. We talked about this on Comic Lab. It's herd mentality. It's the mentality you have because you heard it, right? Everybody says it because everybody was told it, and everybody was told it because it's what everybody says. And but it's the same reason, Melissa, that every time I tell somebody I'm a comic strip artist or I work in comics, or I tell them I do a comic strip, they say, "What newspaper are you in? What syndicate are you with? Are you in newspapers?" And I always ask them the same thing. What newspaper do you subscribe to? They go, "Well, I don't subscribe to a newspaper." I said, "Yeah, neither do I. That's why I'm not in newspapers." But it's a holdover. It's the same reason that actors and actresses think that somebody is going to roll up in a limousine, roll down that back window, take the cigar out of their mouth and say, "I like you, kid. I like your moxie. I'm going to make you a star." That was something that happened again in a very narrow little portion of the studio system in Hollywood that is not around anymore. But if you talk to somebody in the performing arts and ask them what success looks like, it's a version of that fantasy that was played out so beautifully on the Muppet movie when they went into Orson Welles to get their standard rich and famous contract, right? That everybody believes that myth because everybody was told that myth, and everybody was told it because everybody says it, and everybody says it because that's what everybody was told, and on and on and on we go. It's the same reason. It's the same reason. Even though Marvel Comics hasn't been hasn't has been a rounding error for the Marvel corporation, they still think it's a thing. And they're not. Here's the problem. I give you you have my sympathy when it comes to the fact that you believe something you were told because you were told by somebody who looked like they knew what they were talking about, or you got told the same story so many different times that corroborated, so you took it for truth. You got my sympathy there. The problem is all of these answers, comics history, for example, all of these answers are so easy to find. It's so easy to do just a little bit of due diligence and find out the truth behind these stories. That's where you start to lose my sympathy. Tyler says, I'm going to add an educational dinosaur comic to my horror comic. Would you recommend a separate Substack and Blue Sky? Yeah, you know what? I would. I would definitely recommend a separate Substack for that. Especially since, I mean, you're talking about two things that are so different: educational dinosaur comics and horror comics. Blue Sky, I think, would be a little bit more forgiving, especially Substack. You're gaining, you're gearing everything towards subscribers. You don't want to have subscribers for your horror comic to get an educational dinosaur comic, and vice versa. Blue Sky, I think, is a little bit more forgiving of that. You can choose. I've done it both ways. Uh, because if you think you've got big differences, try to do a safe for work comic and a not safe for work comic and stuff like this, educational outreach that you're doing all at the same time. I've tried to split those up on social media outlets such as Twitter and Blue Sky and so forth. I've had varying degrees of success with it. So my Blue Sky at this point has everything that I do, and I just go, well, people got to deal with it. Uh, but so Blue Sky, I think uh, it's a judgment call. Substack, absolutely. So especially since you've got people who are subscribing directly to that thing, I would want two different Substack publications. And Substack is very easy going. It's easy to do that. I could even figure it out. So if I can do it, you can do it. I guarantee. Nick Wright says, lately I've been experimenting with putting my comics into four 3:2 ratio images for posting to Blue Sky. It's cropped so it looks good before you click in. I'm not sure I like it when you do. Yeah, I have kind of the same experience, Nick, in that I make I make some sacrifices to make my stuff readable in that format when it goes out on Blue Sky. The overall aesthetic of the post, I'm not crazy about, but knowing that they can actually read it if they want to is much more important to me. And then part of my overall outreach on Blue Sky is to remind people that there's other places they can read the comic. Because again, one of the things you're doing on social media is not only grabbing that reader in the moment and converting them to somebody who's interested in your stuff, but you're also kind of nudging them towards other ways they can read your comics. So I'm going to always be pointing towards e-comics and physical books and my website and Substack and things like that. So it's part of a multi-pronged outreach, but I agree. I sometimes I look at my own comic and I'm like, and in the original post. Now, when I click on that, it's so much more readable, right? It's much more readable. But that original post doesn't look great, and sometimes I wonder how confusing it is. The other option is just for me to put something in that would be impossible to read, that I'd have to click on it to expand it and then pinch and zoom and make my finger go back and forth. And I know nobody's going to do that. So it's kind of for those of us doing multi-panel, it's kind of, you gotta kind of do the best you can and make sure that you're bolstering that with other outreach that say, there's other ways you can read this freaking comic. If I the hope is you grab them on one that they're actually able to read, and then if that happens once or twice, they start to be like, oh, I want to know more about this person. Maybe I'll download an e-comic. Maybe I'll get these through Patreon. That's why, and Nick, you know how I feel about this. That's why it's so important to make sure you're putting your stuff on Patreon so that it's readable on a small screen too. Patreon has that image gallery, and so if I'm posting any of my multi-panel work, I'll post a chunk of it, like as a half page or as let's say a 4-panel comic strip. But then I'll also have each individual panel so that they can do the equivalent of a vertical scroll. It's horizontal scroll on Patreon in that image gallery, but I want that to be readable. And I see my Patreon backers gravitating towards that a lot. Not only do I know they're picking up on it because sometimes they find mistakes in the individual panels, but also because they catch like some small Easter eggs. I just posted an After Dark page that I had a lot of fun putting little Easter eggs into this really big sweeping panel. And I broke the panel. It was a long horizontal panel. And as you know, doing long horizontals on social media ain't so great, but I always plan for that. So if you ever see me do a horizontal panel, I've planned for how I'm going to chop that up into smaller panels when I put it onto social media. I'll never put necessarily, unless I have to, like again, gun to your head type of deal. I'm never going to put a horizontal out there on social media. I've always got that horizontal planned in such a way that I can cut it, slice it, dice it, and put it out so it's readable. And then, of course, all these details jump right out to my Patreon backers when I do it that way. And I know, in fact, today I got more reinforcement because they caught all this small stuff that I did. It was really great. I post my comic on my website, Substack, and then on social 3 days later to encourage subscriptions. Is this strategy worthwhile, or should I post it every? Well, Devin, you tell me, because you've been doing this for a while. Is it generating subscriptions? So if it's doing what you need it or want it to do, then that's great. I don't know. So here's the deal. What you're basically offering your subscribers is early access. Uh, and you want to encourage subscribers because they get early access. There's only one problem with that. Early access really isn't much of a reward. And you've got to understand why we all use it. And it isn't because it's a good reward. There, after doing crowdfunding for as long as I've done it, and this goes for like Substack, but mainly these thoughts are for Patreon. But I think this is going to apply to Substack as well. On Patreon, you should have basically 3 tiers, and you can go further. But if you're starting out, I don't want you to go much further than 3 because I don't want you to have too many options. I want you to give people limited options. There is such a thing as having too many options. And if I was guiding somebody towards doing a Patreon today, it would be 3, 6, and 12. $3, $6, $12. $3 is basically the support tier. And if you've seen me anywhere, you know that I never say support me on Patreon. I think that's bad marketing language. I think that's a bad outreach, but it is okay to have a support tier. These are the people, you just don't say support me. Okay. Don't do that. Uh, $3 tier, that's just for the people who like what you do. They like that they see it and they get it in their socials or on your website or on RSS or wherever. And they're happy to just put in $3 a month to keep you going. That's the support tier. Uh, the $6 tier would be if you're offering an exclusive reward that has some degree of demand. And of course, a $12 tier is a reward tier that has a greater degree of demand. Okay. To a point that I'd say high demand. Now, what those mid demand and high demand things are is up to you. It's going to change with literally every comic. Okay. And you have to decide what that is, and you have to build your Patreon around that. But those exclusives is what's going to build and generate those tiers at the $6 and the $12 level. At the $3 level, that's where you put early access, and it's there just to give those $3 people something. Right? It's just something. But we all know that getting your work 3 days earlier than it comes out on socials is not really a reward. Okay. So I don't think I'm going to guess that you've been doing this for a while and it hasn't been working because you've been trying to build, the big thing is, hey, subscribe and you'll get it 3 days early. Well, that's not a reward. That's something you give to the people who are already your fans as a little something extra for that support level. Remember when we talked about the Kickstarter ladder, we talked about getting them started on that bottom rung just so you can talk them up the ladder. That's what early access is for. Okay. There might be some people who are doing much more compelling work than I do that are able to get a lot more out of early access. But for me, Devin, I haven't experienced that. People are more than happy to wait 3 days, keep that $3 in their pocket, and then just get it free. That's been my experience. Your experience might be different, and if it is, go with it. But if I'm building Patreon or Substack crowdfunding, that early access is just a little something to get you started. Okay. It's not a real reward. It's just a little something. It's an acknowledgement. It's a little gratuity, that you're basically adding in there. Don't count on it for more than that. It would be my advice. What's your definition of success of comics? My success is to be able to do what I do for a living for one more year. And that was my definition last year and the year before, and hopefully it'll be my definition next year. This is something that I'm able to do full time in my studio, and I love doing it. My definition of success is to just be able to do it one more year. The more important question there is, what's your definition of success? Everybody's definition of success is different. You're going to probably have 10 different versions of the answer to that question over time. And it's really important for you to take some time and think about what your answer to that question is, because I've done this in consultations before, or I say, hey, what does success look like for you? And they've never thought of it. They don't know. They just know that it involves money. There's money involved. How much money? Enough for you to quit your day job, enough for you to go from part-time or from full-time to part-time. What is that success? And you realize this person's never thought of it before. And how do you find something before you know what you're looking for? You can't. You can't. So that's that. The more important question, Egypt, is what does that mean for you? If you're interested in a consultation, go over to the Webcomics Handbook on Substack. As always, listen to the Comic Lab podcast. We've got lots of free advice there, and even more great stuff happening on the Pro Tips exclusive podcasts that we do there. A lot of stuff. For those of you interested in writing comics, we do on the Patreon exclusive Pro Tips for Comic Lab, we do a writing room where Dave and I will try to write a punchline in real time, like no plans. Just go in. One of us says, I got a joke I want to write about. Dave brought this in last week. I want to write about this idea I've got. Two hummingbirds talking to each other, and one says the other, is it just me or do I always feel tired? And we both agreed that was on a scale of 1 to 10, that was about maybe a 4, right? Was a good punchline, not a great punchline. And we went we turned our microphones on, and through the process of a half an hour of batting ideas back and forth, yes-anding each other and so forth, we actually got to a punchline that I really like, so much so that we challenged each other to draw the same punchline. And if you follow either one of us on social media or here on Substack, you saw both of those and our reaction to that. So lots of great stuff going on in the Comic Lab podcast. We've got some great topics coming up. And as always, you can catch me on Blue Sky, where I'm constantly posting. I've kind of decided that this is the time to really try to get engagement on Blue Sky. I don't think it's going to happen like this forever. I think eventually they're going to scale back. So I'm trying to do as much posting on Blue Sky as I can. So you can see a lot of my stuff on Blue Sky if you follow me there. Everything from my Safe for Work comics, promos for my Not Safe for Work comics, the Comic Lab podcast, these live streams, and my new show I'm doing with Dave Kellett and Kevin McShane called The Wrong Way, where we try to show people the wrong way to draw, which has been a lot of fun. Along those lines, thank you so much for everyone for dropping in. Erie, thanks for coming by. I appreciate you. Egypt, thanks for your great questions. Stan, thank you for showing up on another Friday. And thank you for showing up. Let's do this again next Friday, 2 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. and we'll talk comics. Until then, have a great weekend. Be creative, and don't be afraid to jump into my timeline. Tell me what you're proud of, because I want to hear about it. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.